Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all feeling well. Today is the Bath of Thomas. It's a very significant date in Jewish history for a few reasons. Two of them being that the first tablets were broken, the mitzvot were broken on this date, and also one more, whether we're more aware of, is the breach of the walls of the city of Jerusalem, which ultimately led to the destruction of the second temple, which we will commemorate a few weeks' time on Tisha B'Av. And it really is a pleasure to introduce Chava tonight, speaking on mourning, the loss of mourning.
Thank you very much, Eva. And I came here many times years ago when there was Hagar and when other rabbis were here, even Rabbi Fancy. Well, not probably right here, but anyway. I'd like to dedicate tonight's learning for a crucially in Christmas Kayla. And I'd like to thank Rabbi. Am I speaking loud? Not loud enough. If I'm not loud enough, yeah, no, do louder. Is that okay? All right, good. So I'd like to thank you very much to Rabbi Chava, Rabbi and Emma Taylor, and Rabbi Finn for inviting me. Thank you very much. And I like doing interactive things. So if anybody doesn't like what I say or they want to ask me something, please feel free to ask or interject or whatever you want to say. So as Eva said, that we are commemorating Shiva, Asar, which starts a period of 3 weeks. It starts a period of 3 weeks of mourning in the run-up to Tisha B'Av. And we do lots of different things to commemorate the fact that we do not anymore have the Beis Hamikdash. We are hoping all the time that we'll get the third temple. The problem is, what happened when the temple was destroyed? After the second temple was destroyed, what did the people do? Because they were like really in the thick of it. They lived it. It's very hard for us to connect. Well, maybe it's easy for you, but I find it difficult to connect to something that I never had. I didn't live at the time of the Beis Hamikdash. I almost don't know what I'm missing. So there's one thing we can do is we can learn about it. But what did the people do at the time when the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed? And it's not like the first temple when it was destroyed, that there was a prophecy that within 70 years it was like an achievable. We think it's maybe going to happen soon, but for us it's thousands of years, more than 2,000, maybe 3,000 years. We've had no temple. But what did the people do at the actual time? So the Gemara in Baba Basra, 60b. Does anyone have a sheet? Yeah. Oh, sheet? Oh, fantastic. Okay. Well, I'm not going to follow the sheet perfectly. I'll follow it in order, but I will. I'll do much more loose translating. But anybody who wants to have it afterwards, they can have it afterwards. So this is all part of Gemara Baba Basra, Samach Beis. Tana Rabbana. The rabbi said, "Shechorav habayis b'shnia." When the second temple was destroyed, Rabu Purushim. A lot of people became ascetics. They became like almost hermits. They felt there was no purpose in living, and they felt they were not. It wouldn't be the right thing to do to celebrate and live life normally because it was so tragic, and they had witnessed such atrocities. They didn't know how to function. So they decided to take upon themselves not to eat meat and not to drink wine as an expression of mourning for the lust of the temple. No hope of redemption. Rabbi Yeshua came up to people who took the whole thing very seriously, which is not to be scoffed at, it's a good thing, but maybe perhaps they took it too seriously, and he said to them, my children, why are you not eating meat and why are you not drinking wine? Omrulo, they answered him. This is number 3. We go following on sheet. Shall we eat meat when the temple, we can't offer up sacrifices on the temple, and we can't offer up meat sacrifices on the temple? But Ashar, hotel, and now the temple is destroyed, should we dare eat meat when we can't offer up on the temple? Benishte yayin shemenachsin al gabe mizbeach ba'achshav hotel. They would offer up wine libations on the temple altar. How can we stuff our faces eating meat and drinking wine when that is no longer something that we can do in the temple? Rabbi Yeshua answers them in a sarcastic tone. If you're going to be strict on yourself, Lechem lo nochal. I've got a good idea. Don't eat bread. Because shekvar botlu menachos. Because the meal offerings, the mincha offering, were not offered up in the temple. So if you're going to be strict on yourself and you're not going to have meat and you're not going to drink wine, go the whole way. Don't eat bread. So they were like, okay. So what do they answer? And they say, efshar b'peiros. It's possible to subsist eating fruits, which means fruits and vegetables, and we won't eat any flour products because it's sad that we don't have a temple anymore. And he answers them, number 6, peiros no nochal. You can't eat fruit, and he's referring here specifically to the fruit of the 7 species, like pomegranates, grapes, figs, because they might remind you of the Bikurim, the first fruits that the Bnei Israel commanded to give in the temple. And we don't have a temple, so you can't eat fruits. Bit sarcastic, but he's slightly, tongue-in-cheek, saying, you're taking it too seriously, you can't live like this. And they ask him, number 7, Efshar b'piras achirim. There are other fruits, we can eat carrots and cucumbers and whatever else they can find, we'll just manage. So, number 8, he carries on with a sarcastic tone, Rabbi Yoshua, and he says, Ma'im lo nishter. If you want to go the full way with this theory, don't drink water. How do they respond? Because water was one of the things they offered up. Nisuch hamayim, the water libations have ceased because there's no temple, and therefore you shouldn't drink water. How do they respond? Number 9, shosku, they were silent. Okay, so I'd like to offer anybody like to think about, why do you think they were silent? There's not an answer, a right answer, whatever your answer is right. Anybody? Can we do interaction on Okay, thank you very much. I don't know your name is, but thank you very much for contributing. Tosfos says they could have survived maybe on fruit juice, but perhaps that was too restrictive. But perhaps in antiquity it was difficult to get fresh water. People drank wine and beer. Some people might have thought that was totally in existence, but clearly not. There was no way. They realized that if they were going to take this to the nth degree, there was no way that they were going to be able to survive, and they realized there was no way that they could carry on this school of thought. Rabbi Yoshua says to them, source 10, he says to them, listen, not to mourn is impossible because we've already been sent into exile in the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. But to mourn too much is also not good. It's also impossible because the rabbis are not allowed to issue a decree upon the public unless the majority of the public is able to abide by it. What does this mean? The rabbis cannot make an enactment for the community that is not appropriate to put that sort of level of restriction on the community. If I was the rabbi of the community and I come out with an enactment and I say you can't eat in this restaurant, that's my choice and that's my personal opinion, but I can't come and give you a very strict a ruling. A rabbi can't come out and give a very strict ruling, which is too impossible to say, right, you can no longer drink water from the tap and everyone got to buy bottled water or the hechsher. That would be too difficult to live like that. So, for example, other examples of that would be they couldn't institute 2 days fasting consecutively because that would just be too difficult for people to manage. So, rabbis are not allowed to enact that. So, if a person chooses to take upon themselves a stricter level of mourning, that's their prerogative. But the rabbis for the community cannot make it so impossible to live by the enactment that people cannot exist. And at that time, I'm saying this story is written at the time when the Second Temple was destroyed, where the people were so sad and so distraught because they had seen the tragedy of the First Temple, the Second Temple being destroyed firsthand. So what did the rabbis suggest? Let's come to some sort of compromise. Number 11, that if a person builds a home, they should leave a small amount of their home. That's why some people have got the minhag to have like a little bit of an area in their house. Different opinion as to how big it should be. Around Chaim Noah, 48 centimeters squared, Chazon Ish, nice big one, 58 centimeters squared, and maybe some people have got it where they've got bricks in the wall, or which is unplastered, or perhaps it's unpapered. Some people have got a very nice, it's so beautiful, it's like a whole ornate thing that says Imesh Kafet Yerushalayim, that it should be opposite the entrance of a person's home. Rabbi Yoshua continues that if a person makes a meal, they shouldn't make it so elaborate. They should leave out something from a meal. I don't exactly know how that is. I don't believe that's something that people do today. But maybe if you're going to have a 10-course meal, have a 9-course meal. I don't know if people did this ever, but maybe some people left a seat in their house at the table, like at the Seder table, like as if someone didn't arrive, just to remember that at the time of our happiness, we've got a little bit of us has to step back and remember that we don't have full happiness. Number 13, the women, when they wear jewelry, they shouldn't wear all their jewelry. I don't know what the definition of that is, because you can wear like 20 necklaces, so I don't know exactly how that's the halacha l'maaseh say how actually that's practical today. One rabbi, Ben Yehoyada, suggests that these 3 things, decorating your house, eating at your table, and jewelry for women, are reminiscent of 3 things, 3 aspects of temple life. The house is the temple, the Bet HaMikdash. The food is the altar, the Mizbeach, and the jewelry is perhaps similar in some ways to the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and the clothing that he would have worn. So all these ideas of sort of like thinking about the temple at the points of our highest joy. And then the Gemara carries on and says, a pasuk from Tehillim, Psalm 137, Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yemini. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its cunning. Let it Tidbach lashoni lechiki im lo eskerechi im lo aleh es Yerushalayim al rosh simchosi. Let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. And the Gemara asks a question on this. What does it mean, al rosh simchosi, on the highest point, the pinnacle of my joy? The word rosh is head, and for this we have the custom from 15 for bridegrooms. I don't know who is married and they've had it happen to them, or perhaps someone's seen it happen. It's traditional for a bridegroom, just as he's about to walk down to the park, just the marriage canopy, the rabbi, somebody will put ashes on his forehead, on the pinnacle of the joyous circumstance in his life. We assume that the person getting married is very happy about it, and it is the most joyous circumstance in his life. At this time, we still remember the ashes, and we hold within ourselves the ashes of the temple. And our joy is not complete because the temple is no longer with us. It's number 16. Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha said, from the day that the temple was destroyed, by rights, we should have decreed upon ourselves not to eat meat and not to drink wine, but we cannot do this because it would be too impossible for us to do this every day, to constantly take this upon ourselves. Now, I realize there are people who are vegetarian and vegan, and some people are teetotal, and there are people can make their own personal choices, but the rabbis can't make it an action that's too difficult for people to keep. Mourning should not be a tidal wave, rather it should be woven into the fabric of life. The rabbis, Rabbi Yoshua in particular, recognize as tragic, and it is tragic that we don't have the temple anymore. We have to live. We have to carry on living, because, number 17, from the day that the wicked kingdom, referring to the Roman kingdom, spread and evil decrees and harsh decrees upon us, they nullified Torah study and the performance of mitzvahs, and they did not allow us to perform the mitzvah of bris milah, circumcision, or pidyon haben, salvation, redeeming the firstborn. They didn't allow us to do that. If anyone was caught giving their child a bris milah, even any get at the circumcision, would be killed by the Romans if they were caught keeping the Jewish laws. Now, if we didn't have children, we wouldn't be able to carry on our lives. People would not be able to live. Like, how do we respond to tragedy? How should the people, after the Second Temple was destroyed, how should they have responded? What should they have done? How could they live? Carrying on with number 18, by rights, a person should decree upon themselves not to get married. We should be so sad that we should take it upon ourselves, even though the rabbis didn't make that absolutely is enactment. We should literally feel the pain that we don't have a temple anymore, and we should not have children, we shouldn't get married. But what would happen if nobody get married, nobody had children? The Romans don't need to bother killing us at circumcision. We'll die out ourselves. It will be a natural. We'll just die out ourselves. But the rabbis say you have to leave the principle. You have to let the Jewish people live. We have to b'chai for him. We have to live by the principle. Don't make life so difficult. It's better that they are unwitting sinners who don't know what they're doing is not right. If someone wants to take a strict view upon themselves, they can. Rather than you should make an accident and then everybody can't help themselves. You can't expect the whole community not to get married and not to have children. Now, I am not in any way, so I'll just stop there if anybody would like to say anything or comment.
Not to find it odd that they didn't stop being Jewish.
I would hazard a guess that some people might have tried to, but I think that it's difficult to imagine because we're thinking in terms of 21st century eyes where, you know, post-reform, post-Haskalah, enlightenment. I think life was different then. I think that life was different then. I think people were the same. That everybody, their eyes were not open. They didn't see another life. They were always persecuted. The Jews were persecuted, and they had to be different, and they kept themselves very different, separate. What I'd like to suggest in the second half of tonight is, I'm not comparing and contrasting the response of the Second Temple being destroyed to the Holocaust, but in my own life, my father was alive during the Holocaust, and I always think, how is it? And I know lots of schools have speakers, guest speakers who survived the Holocaust. How on earth did they get themselves together and rebuild their lives after the tragic events that they saw and that we know about? We know about it, but people we know lived through those terrible times. The Klausenberg already said after the war, the biggest miracle is that people believed and kept any mitzvahs at all, or that we have a Jewish community after the war. If you look at the bottom of the sheet, bottom of page 2, page 4, I think you've got it, there's like a little diagram. It's a psychology model based on the Kubler-Ross model, 1969, the 5 stages of grief. And Kubler-Ross, can you see the picture, yeah? It said, like, when something terrible happens to someone, something tragic happens to someone, there's something like, you know, you're just about married and like, how am I going to cope? And then you're in a massive shock. And then you're sort of like, I'm okay, because you're in complete denial. And then you're like, it sinks in, and you're like, how can I manage? This is like impossible. How am I going to do this? And then the path splits. Some people get to a level of acceptance, and they come to some sort of new level of normal existence, and other people they get cathartic and they depression sets in, and they're in crisis and they cannot overcome the difficulties they've seen and the difficulties they've heard. Post the Holocaust, there were quite a lot of people who didn't speak about their experiences at all. And there were lots of people, I know that in our community, there are lots of Holocaust survivors who never say, I never knew they were Holocaust survivors as a young child. And it's only in the last 10 years they're now telling their story. And their children didn't even know where they were in the camp. I know, for example, I don't know if you've seen on television, there's a man whose name is Manfred Goldberg. He lives in my street. He went with Prince William and Kate to where he was in the concentration camp. He's in 3 camps in Stockholm. I knew him my whole life. I never knew he was a survivor. But there were a few people who wrote books very soon after the Holocaust. And there were people I know whose children I'm friendly with who wrote books. For example, I don't know if anybody knows Alan Bronstein, his father, Ernst Bronstein wrote a book called The Long Night, like Love Nacht, in German, but it's only recently translated into English. But then there are other people which are more famous, for example, Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman, or Maus, where the son of the Holocaust survivor drew a cartoon. Art Spiegelman drew cartoons with mice and representing the coalition, the coalition and the Russians and the Germans. Primo Levi perhaps is the most well-known, in my opinion, was well known. He was an Italian and he wrote a book, and excuse me if anyone speaks Italian here, I think in Italian it's called Se questo è il uomo, and he wrote it in 1947, so soon after the war, and it was translated into English, and it goes by the name, If This Is a Man. And I don't know if anybody, people like volunteering to read, but would anybody like to read 20? Got a volunteer? Otherwise, you like hearing my voice so much. Okay, I've got a volunteer. Thank you. 20.
Face to face with the proud and power of those women, each of us survivors are living in a different manner. It is possible to describe two typical couples. Those who refuse to go back, or who want to discuss the matter, belong to the first category, as do those who would like to forget but do not succeed in doing so, and are tormented by nightmares, and those who have instead forgotten, dismissed everything, begun again to live, starting from zero. I have noticed that in general, all of those individuals who end up in the house do bad luck. That is, without a precise political or moral commitment. For them, the suffering was a traumatic experience, but devoid of meaning, like a misfortune or an illness. The memory is for them a kind of training for them, a painful match that intuited into their lives, which they have sought or still seek to eliminate. The second category is composed of ex-political prisoners, or those who possess at least a measure of political separation, or religious conviction, or a strong moral consciousness. For these survivors, remembering is a duty. They do not want to forget, and even more, they do not want the world to forget, because they have understood that their experience was not meaningless, that the counts were not happening, one after being.
Here we have Primo Levi, 2 years after the Holocaust. He's completely aware of the fact that there's the two paths people can take. I don't want to do this, I want to get on with my life, and the other's like, there has to be meaning in this. And those are the people who, post-Holocaust, built up their lives and said, I've got to do everything I can and rebuild the Jewish community. Now, there were other people who were like, as I don't know what the gentleman in the blue jumper is, what your name is, but he said there were some people who couldn't. I know personally, I have a great aunt. She was in the French resistance, and the first thing she did when she could, she pulled off her yellow star and she flushed it in the toilet. And she said, that's it, I'm done with you. I cannot live like this. Ironically, she actually married someone Jewish who lived in America. But we cannot judge. We don't know what it was like for people. And this is like, only because I can see, because I know people who lived through it, and my own father, he wasn't in the camps, but his life was very badly affected by living through the Second World War. Can we even begin to understand a tiny bit as the second generation or the third generation? And we are so far removed from the temple being destroyed. How did the people survive after the temple was destroyed? How can a person find meaning after tragedy? Can we rebuild our lives? Can we today manage without the temple? I also think there are lots of other examples in modern day times. For example, after 9/11, that was like such a shock. The newspapers predicted after 9/11 that there would be a baby boom, but there would also be lots more people getting married and lots more people getting divorced. And we've seen in our own very recent past with COVID, people have taken stock of their lives and they thought to themselves, where are we going? What are we going to do from here? So there's a doctor, who was Dr. Yael Fuchs in Long Island College Hospital. She said, after 9/11, people said, life is too short. When people see their mortality, they make decisions. So they change, they decide what they want to do. I'm going to move to 22. Howard Jacobson, the novelist and journalist and broadcaster, he wrote an introduction to a book that Primo Levi wrote, the person who wrote about his Holocaust experiences in Italian. He only wrote it 2 years after the war, but Howard Jacobson wrote this introduction in 2013. And he tells us that as survivors, and we are survivors of the Holocaust, but we are also survivors as we are the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-grandchildren of the destruction of the temple We have got a duty not to forget. Do I have another volunteer? Shorter, 22. Thank you.
The danger, as time goes by, is that we will tire of hearing about the Holocaust, grow not only weary, but disbelieving. And as out of fatigue and ignorance, more than cynicism, we will belittle and by stages finally deny, actively or by default, the horror of the extermination camps and the wars. By then, so many fading memories of those who experienced them. The obligation to remember is inscribed on every Holocaust memorial, but even the words "never forget" become irksome eventually. We don't like being reminded of our obligations. We don't want to go on taking the mention, especially when we don't accept that we are sick.
Thank you for correcting my spelling today. You had it all there. I found that so powerful because when we are going to, in 3 weeks' time, sit on the floor and read Asar, and we're going to be sitting in Shiur, and we're like, what can we do in our lives to connect, to think more about what it was like and how tragic it is that we don't have the temple anymore? I know we've got a beautiful Shiur here, and there's another one in Yavne and all the other places nearby, but at the end of the day, we're all yearning for, and we say all the time in our prayers, bring us back. We want to go back to the days of old. We want to go back to the temple. I read something very moving by a lady whose name was Michal Avera Samuel, and she was a Jew in Ethiopia, and she was one of the people who came in 1984 on the mission, Operation Moses, to the land of Israel, when they took a whole load of Ethiopian Jews and they took them to Israel. And she thought in her life, they never knew, for the people who were not born in 1984, I can see a few younger people there, we didn't have the internet and there was not much television. I think in 1984 we only had Channel 4. They didn't, certainly not in Ethiopia, I don't think they had satellite television. They never knew that the temple was destroyed. And she writes the following, if you want afterwards, maybe Eva can send out the link if you can't type it out, but whatever, okay? And she says, up till the age of 9, number 24, I lived in a world where the Bet HaMikdash, the holy temple in Jerusalem, actually existed. She never knew that it didn't exist. Like my parents and teachers, I believe the second temple stood in its place in Jerusalem and was literally made of pure gold. I grew up hearing about the Kohanim, the holy priests, and how they worked on the temple. I fell asleep listening to stories about the halo hovering over Jerusalem and about Jews who merited to dwell in the holy city, clothed in white garments. People blessed with pure hearts, clean thoughts, and devoid of sin. Overhead, I would imagine the Shekhinah, the divine presence, as angels. The ideal of Jerusalem was the force that provided us with the stamina to persevere during the arduous trek through the desert. It was the dream that kept us going. We wanted to reach it, to achieve it. We buried our beloved family members, left our possessions behind willingly, and lost them to vicious deeds. We struggled to keep going despite the terrible conditions and hunger, only because of our goal to reach Jerusalem of gold after so many generations stand by the gates of the holy temple. Then we arrived and discovered that the temple had been destroyed. Jerusalem did not appear the place I had so badly yearned to reach. Learning about the destruction of the temple only as I reached the gates of the old city was an earth-shattering disappointment, and it left a great void in me that I have been unable to fulfill. And I'm thinking to myself, in 1984, she didn't know the temple was destroyed, and it's been destroyed for thousands of years. And almost like, not we take it for granted, but it's so part of our society and so part of our daily life. We know there's no temple. And yes, we do certain things to remember. We say B'li Yerushalayim, you're supposed to say Al Naharos Kovel, and we've got the little plaque in the house, and you know, there are things we do, and Asher the bridegroom's forehead. But we do not have, well, maybe you do, I do not have, I wish I had the sensitivity of this lady, Michal, who was in Ethiopia, and she was waiting to see Jerusalem. And when she saw it, well, it was like unthinkable for her that she didn't have a temple. And we have to sort of try and tune ourselves in to think we have that temple. I mean, maybe, you know, teachers have done certain things in school. They've like built a model and then they've bashed it down, and the kids are all gutted that the model they built was broken. And then the teacher would say, see what it's like, you had that, and then you lost it. Or another teacher I know did an experiment with the children and said, like, conjure up a beautiful building, and then, you know, you've lost that image. How can we try and think about what it was like to have that temple? One of my friends said how she just gave me this idea, and she said, like, maybe if we think about how awful it is for us that we lost the whole area of Gush Katif, where there were so many settlements and people had their lives and livelihoods in that area, and that was taken away. Maybe that can help us think about it. I read something that Natan Sharansky wrote. Actually, I found it on Facebook. He wrote it in 2018. So it's already now 43 years ago, and he said the following. What kept him going all the time, he was in jail in Russia. And he says, because he said it at the time, it was 40 years before. Today would be just over 43 years as I stood before 3 Soviet judges and said the following words. This is Natan Sharansky, Anatoly Sharansky, who was a Russian refusenik who was put in jail, and he was unfairly tried. He said there in the court case, he said, for 2,000 years, the Jewish people, my people, have been dispersed all over the world and seemingly deprived of any hope of returning. But still, each year, Jews have stubbornly said to each other, L'Shana Haba Yerushalayim, next year will be in Jerusalem. And today, when I am further than ever from my dream, from my people, and from my wife, Avital, when so many difficult years of prisons and camps lie ahead of me, I say to my wife and my people, L'Shana Haba Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. And to the court, which has only to read the sentence that was prepared long ago, to you I have nothing to say. And Natan Sharansky says the following. As I stood in that Moscow courtroom, my wife Avital marched with thousands of Jews in Amsterdam and The Hague, London and Paris. She heard of my final remarks and my sentencing as she landed in Washington. In the 8 years that he was in a prison that followed, she went on marching, and the Jews of the world marched with her. And it's because of them that 8 years after that bleak July the 14th, coming up almost 43 years ago, in Moscow, I finally made it to Jerusalem and touched the Western Wall. All he wanted to do was to get to Jerusalem. Today, the Soviet Empire is gone, and the Jewish story, which it tried to repress, the story of those people who prayed to reach Jerusalem, lives on. And today, he said it 3 years ago, 40 years after my sentencing, my family is preparing to bring our 7th grandchild into the Brito Shel Avraham Avinu. He had a grandchild who had a Brit Milah in Jerusalem, and the Jewish story in Jerusalem. And he says, I thank my wife for marching, and may the Jewish people continue marching together from strength to strength. The Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yisrael ben Eliezer, who was a Kabbalist from Poland, passed away in 1760. He says, forgetfulness prolongs the exile, remembrance is the secret to redemption. I missed out this little quote from the Gemara in Baba Basra. It was somewhere at a little store. Let me tell you what source number. Source 15. There's a line that I'd like to end with today. V'chol hamis'abel al Yerushalayim, zocher, number 25, zocher v'ro'eh v'simchaso. Anyone who mourns for the destruction of Jerusalem, it's number 25 in the sheet, it's just missed out from the other part, belongs at the end of source 15, will merit to see its joy. And I sincerely hope that we all find a way to connect somehow and are able over the next few weeks to find a way to connect to the fact that we do not anymore have the temple, and we should all merit to see its joy. Just to recap what we said, how do we commemorate? The people at the time when the temple was destroyed, they couldn't move on with their lives. They took things upon themselves very stringently, and when I started off, I spoke about them not wanting to eat, not wanting to eat meat, and not wanting to drink wine. Rabbi Yeshua said you need to have a more balanced approach. You cannot live like that, and we cannot make it an accident upon the whole community. It's impossible to keep. We have to find meaning in what happened, and we have to rebuild our lives, and we have to do whatever we can to keep the memory of the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, alive. And a home is a mishkan ma'at, a miniature sanctuary. We have to live our lives in a way that we are yearning for and looking forward to rebuilding the temple. Do we actually feel the loss? Can we think of ways that we can keep alive the memory of what we've lost? And we look forward to a future where we will all be celebrating in the ultimate salvation. May it come speedily in our days. I wish everybody an easy fast. Let's hope even this year will be all in Jerusalem. And anybody would like to comment and say something on something? Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Firstly, Chava, thank you so much for that fascinating, really, really fascinating. I'm reminded of a Yiddish saying, I won't say it in English, but the saying goes like this, I think it's encapsulates everything you said. The Yiddish saying is that a worm that lives in horseradish doesn't realize its life is bitter. And I think part of the issue we have here is because who would know this? Children never know anything life without the internet. We've never known life with the temple. It's been so long, we've never actually lost. And we think it's like regardless of actually sweet, in fact, actually, it's bitter because we don't have a temple. That's the real challenge. And I think you built it to life and really brought it home to us. That actually what we're mourning now, the next 3 weeks, how on Shiva is the loss itself. The fact that we're mourning the loss. There's a beautiful story of someone who once a non-religious Jew once went to Shiva, and he saw all these people sitting on the ground crying, and he didn't understand what was going on, but he started to cry. And he started crying himself. The religious Jew turned around and said, "Why are you crying?" He says, "I'm crying because I don't know why I'm crying." And I think that's the least we can do, is that during this time we can suddenly realise actually we don't know what we've lost, and then we should cry about the fact we don't know what we've got. That's the very start. I think you've brought home to us this, the need for this balance, which is, as the Son of the Moral, to continue with our lives, also to never lose sight of what we've got and how great that loss is. And again, I'm reminded of that film called Paperclip. People see that film, anyone seen that film? We've shown it on, it's a good film to watch on Shiva. The film is called Paperclips. It's a story of a primary school in America where the teacher was trying to, correct me if I'm wrong, the teacher was trying to teach the children about the Holocaust and the fact that 1.5 billion children killed during the Holocaust. Children couldn't fathom those numbers are just too big. Like the last 2,000 years, it's too big to realise what we've lost. And the only way they went about it was to set about collecting. They wrote to people, they collected a million and a half paper clips they had in this collection. And through that, something small, something tangible, they were able to actually visualize and actually quantify this idea of the loss of other people. And I think that's what we're saying here is beautiful. The idea is to be able to connect and to commemorate the loss. We take something very small, like a sword, nothing like that. We each take something very small into our lives. We continue with our lives, live our lives to the fullest, but to internalize very, very valuable for, to keep the memory of the loss of the temple alive. Through that, we should be so careful. We should see it rebuild when it comes to hero. Be in our days. Amen. Thank you again.